Welcome to Dialogue. Tonight we are opening a discussion that really acts as a mirror held up to the world's most powerful institutions. We're examining a case that, maybe more than any other in modern history, exposed these fundamental flaws and, well, the deep structural rot at the very top of our global power structures.
In finance, in law,
In politics, academia, you name it.
the core questions here, I think, move so far beyond the sensational elements you see in the headlines.
Right.
We really have to ask, what happens when the justice system encounters a wall of extreme wealth and influence?
Right.
What does it reveal about the systems designed to protect us, from law enforcement all the way up to the highest courts? If a known sexual predator could build an empire of abuse that spanned decades and continents without facing any serious consequence until it was almost too late.
And that really is the mission tonight. This deep dive is fundamentally about that structural failure. We need to look beyond the individual and understand the intricate architecture of power. How was it built? Who enabled it? And maybe most importantly, why did justice repeatedly, systemically fail? What is the ultimate legacy of what was really a protection racket?
It forces us to confront this really uncomfortable truth that extreme wealth often grants not just luxury, but practical impunity.
Yes.
We have to trace the lines of influence that made that impunity possible.
Okay, let's unpack this. And I think we have to start at the very beginning. When you look at the early profile of this individual, what is so striking is the sheer baffling disconnect between his modest beginnings and the untouchable elite he so quickly became.
Right.
He was born in Brooklyn in 1953, raised in a modest household. Yes, he was academically gifted, especially in math, but the initial clues, they just don't explain the trajectory.
It's the original enigma of the case, isn't it?
Yeah.
He never completed a verifiable college degree.
Not degree.
He didn't follow any of the traditional credential paths to power.
Yeah.
Yet his career involved these rapid, completely unexplained leaps into hyper-elite circles.
And the first leap is maybe the most important one. Securing a teaching position at the Dalton School in Manhattan.
The Dalton School, for anyone who doesn't know, this is one of the most exclusive private institutions in New York.
It educates the children of Wall Street titans, powerful political families.
And here's the fact that should just stop you in your tracks. He became a teacher there in the late 1970s, despite having no college degree, no teaching license,
No qualifications?
and no traditional teaching qualifications whatsoever. It makes no sense on paper.
So how does that happen?
That job was the skeleton key. It wasn't really about teaching, it was about access. By becoming a math and science instructor at Dalton, he bypassed every traditional meritocratic gatekeeper of high society. He positioned himself not as a student or a rival, but as an indispensable sort of confidant, intellectual mentor to the families who controlled Manhattan's wealth. He cultivated relationships, not degrees.
And that proximity immediately paid off. He left teaching after just a couple of years and somehow lands a job at Bear Stearns, one of the biggest investment banks of the time.
And again, this transition, all the sources confirm, was opaque. It was unconventional. He rises quickly, becoming a limited partner, bypassing all the typical rigorous requirements.
So no MBA.
No MBA, no series certifications, and crucially, no documented financial expertise.
It really solidifies the point that his true genius was social engineering, wasn't it?
That's it exactly. He had this uncanny ability to appear indispensable to people who valued discretion and, this perceived intellectual heft above any verifiable success.
What did his colleagues say?
Former Bear Stearns colleagues noted he was charming, unusually confident, and that he quickly carved out this exclusive, often opaque role advising ultra-high net worth clients. His success was never based on market performance. It was based on perceived access and the trust he managed to generate among the super rich.
And that leads us directly to the sheer mystery of his wealth, which is foundational to the entire criminal enterprise that followed.
The money trail it's a ghost. It's inconsistent, lacking verifiable investment track records, public filings, or clear client documentation.
He just claimed to manage the assets of billionaires, chief among them Leslie Wexner, the founder of L Brands. Victoria's Secret.
The Wexner connection provides the clearest insight into how this whole financial architecture functioned. Wexner granted him this extraordinary, almost unprecedented financial control.
We're talking about comprehensive signing authority.
Yes, power of attorney, access to multiple properties,
Yeah.
including the $77 million Manhattan mansion.
That's just astounding.
This setup demonstrates that his wealth was permission-based. It wasn't a wealth earned through genius investment. It was wealth bestowed because elites allowed it to be.
So Wexner effectively outsourced enormous financial and personal trust to an individual with no transparent credentials.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is that this financial opacity, this architecture built purely on trust and access, was the perfect complement to the architectural precision of his criminal operation.
It provided the resources and it provided the cover. Okay, so let's move to that operation because this was not chaotic improvisation. This was infrastructure.
Yes.
The accounts all stress that this was a deliberate, highly organized system spanning multiple states, multiple countries,
It was a global operation.
coordinating recruitment, transportation, exploitation, and financial coercion.
It was systemic crime operating with, frankly, corporate efficiency. To function so smoothly over decades, the operation required sophisticated logistical and social machinery. And central to that entire machine,
Ghislaine Maxwell.
Ghislaine Maxwell. Her role was absolutely instrumental. She acted not just as a recruiter, but as the social architect, the gatekeeper, and most critically, the normalizer of the abuse.
The normalizer, that's a key concept. Victims consistently described her as the disarming bridge.
They did.
She was warm, engaging, often charismatic, sometimes even presenting this maternal face before the coercion began.
She was vital in managing the properties, handling the money, and creating an environment where the exploitation felt routine, almost bureaucratic,
Yeah.
and unchallengeable to the staff and, of course, to the victims themselves.
And the mechanics of that recruitment were just cold and precise. This wasn't random.
No, not at all. They sought out girls who were financially insecure, emotionally vulnerable, socially isolated, or just actively seeking an opportunity, a way up.
They were often found in specific vulnerable public areas, right? Local malls, community centers.
School campuses, art programs, even parking lots.
Yeah.
The vulnerability was the key criteria. It was a targeted selection process.
And the lure was always the same.
Always. Modeling contracts, tutoring positions, mentorship opportunities, educational funding. It was always a door into a world of wealth and success.
Promises that just evaporated the moment a girl entered his controlled world.
And that's where the grooming script came in. It was a form of psychological warfare, really, designed to establish dependence and confusion.
So how did that work, specifically?
It involved, first, establishing rapport, then offering significant financial help, which makes the victim instantly indebted, then normalizing physical proximity, inappropriate touch, then gradually introducing and breaking sexual boundaries, and ultimately creating this web of psychological conditioning, fear, and financial dependency.
And to maintain this precision across continents, he had a meticulously constructed internal compliance hierarchy.
Yes, a whole staff. We're talking about full-time schedulers, pilots, security, property managers, and recruiters.
And some of those recruiters were victims themselves, coerced into complicity.
Right, is this highly organized exploitation, where individuals were moved between rooms, between houses, between states, with this frightening routine. The staff was explicitly trained to be silent.
So let's talk about the properties. These functioned as operational nodes, not residences.
Exactly. They were strategically acquired spaces.
Mhm.
The Palm Beach compound, the massive New York townhome, Little St. James Island,
Zorro Ranch in New Mexico.
all of them engineered specifically for privacy, for maximum surveillance control, and most importantly, for staff compliance.
So victims reported locked rooms, soundproof areas.
Yes, and staff who were explicitly trained on the protocol of silence and non-intervention. Each property was its own self-contained, insulated ecosystem of control. It was all designed to prevent internal and external leaks.
And then there's the transportation infrastructure, the private jets, famously the Lolita Express. That was an essential tool in all of this.
An absolutely essential tool. It allowed for the discrete transnational movement of minors, kept them separated from commercial flight records, from any kind of documentation, and it gave him access to remote locations like the island.
The jet was crucial then because it dissolved the boundaries of law and accountability.
It did. It was a moving environment of total luxury that concealed the criminal intent. It created this overwhelming, inescapable power imbalance.
Victims flown across borders.
Often with falsified explanations, immense pressure, and these overwhelming promises of opportunity. It effectively eliminated any parental or institutional oversight. It was the ultimate mechanism of control and isolation.
And the entire system, from the recruitment all the way to the jet, was built around manufacturing the illusion of consent.
Yes. Yeah. They weaponized money and gifts to create dependency and confusion. They were aiming for a legal gray zone that they believed they could exploit to protect themselves.
Even though the law is unequivocal, minors cannot consent.
Of course. But that engineered confusion was the system's protective shell. It reinforced a self-reinforcing cycle where victims, feeling shame or fear or financial dependency, could be repeatedly used,
And even introduced his powerful circle.
often as a display of dominance or status for him. This was not a collection of isolated incidents. It was an integrated, multi-location, multi-decade trafficking architecture, and it was protected by layers and layers of elite privilege and professional logistics.
So, when local law enforcement in Palm Beach first uncovered the scale of this operation in the mid-2000s, the evidence should have led to swift federal prosecution.
It should have.
What happened instead is maybe the most chilling demonstration of how easily the justice system bends when it's confronted with elite power.
The initial resistance faced by the local detectives was immediate and, from their accounts, often overwhelming. They built a strong case.
A very strong case.
It involved multiple young victims, yet they said they felt like they were fighting against gravity. They faced aggressive, obstructive behavior from his newly assembled legal team.
Private investigators were intimidating witnesses.
Yes, and there was this unusual level of scrutiny applied not to the suspect, but to the victims, a tactic designed to discredit them based on their socioeconomic background.
And the legal fortress he built was extraordinary. Unprecedented for a local sex crimes investigation.
Absolutely. We're talking about an unparalleled defense team.
Mm-hmm.
Figures like Alan Dershowitz, Ken Starr, Jay Lefkowitz, Gerald Lefcourt. This wasn't a standard legal defense.
Mm-hmm.
This was a political, social, and legal war machine. It was designed to overwhelm.
Exactly. Their tactics were relentless and they were targeted. They challenged the credibility of minor victims in these aggressive ways.
Threatened litigation against journalists or anyone who spoke out.
Right. They leveraged vast social connections and strategically framed him in the public eye as a misunderstood philanthropist.
And the sheer weight of that legal and political capital, it just completely overwhelmed the Palm Beach State Attorney's Office. They simply did not have the resources or, frankly, the political spine to push back.
The case should have been ironclad, though, once the FBI stepped in.
You'd think so.
They uncovered evidence of multiple victims, clear interstate activity that absolutely warranted federal sex trafficking charges. But this is where the back channels kicked in.
And that changed the entire trajectory of the case.
Ah.
The critical turning point happened behind closed doors. His legal team actively and aggressively lobbied senior federal officials. Political intermediaries intervened. They used their contacts and their influence to effectively reroute the case away from a full federal prosecution. It was a coordinated effort that took place over months.
And the most egregious violation detailed in the sources. During these high-level negotiations about the charges, about immunity, the plea deal, the victims were deliberately kept in the dark.
Deliberately, which was a direct, massive violation of the Federal Crime Victims' Rights Act, the CVRA.
Can you explain that?
The CVRA grants victims the right to be reasonably informed of any public court proceeding and, crucially, the right to confer with the attorney for the government regarding any plea agreement.
So by negotiating the deal entirely in secret?
They stripped the victims of their voice, of their legal standing in the federal system. They were rendered invisible.
Which leads us directly to the infamous non-prosecution agreement, the MPA. It remains this stark symbol of elite impunity.
It really does.
Let's just detail how extraordinary this deal was. First, it shielded him from any federal charges.
Major crimes like sex trafficking, gone.
It explicitly granted immunity to unnamed co-conspirators.
That's the one. That's the part that is just, it's breathtaking.
It forced victims into effective silence, and it was initially sealed from public view.
That immunity provision for co-conspirators is perhaps the most alarming detail of all. The system didn't just protect Epstein from accountability. It actively extended a legal shield to others in his extensive orbit.
So the people who facilitated, participated, maybe even financed the crimes.
All of them. All while silencing the survivors and allowing him to plead to a minor state charge. It wasn't a plea deal. It was a structural guarantee of protection for the entire network.
So we have to really analyze why. Why did the institutions, the federal prosecutor's office, the political leadership, why did they sign off on this massive bending of justice?
The analysis really points to institutional fear and dependency. Officials feared political backlash, reputational harm, and the potential scrutiny of their own powerful social circles.
Right.
Remember, he had embedded himself through strategic philanthropy and connections to powerful donors. Challenging him meant challenging the status quo. It meant potentially disrupting the flow of capital and influence that many institutions actually depended on.
So they chose self-preservation over justice.
They did. It paints this incredibly painful picture of cultural deference to power, doesn't it? The sources conclude that the justice system is engineered to grant certain individuals, based purely on their wealth and connections, the ultimate benefit of the doubt.
Even when the evidence of heinous crime is overwhelming.
That cultural bias is the mechanism of structural failure. The years between 2005 and 2008, they weren't an anomaly. They demonstrated how a justice system operates when confronted with the strategic application of elite financial and political pressure.
This raises an important question, then. How often does this bending of the system happen when confronted with elite influence, but without the kind of relentless media and survivor pressure this case eventually received?
That's the question that should keep us up at night. This institutional cowardice is far more pervasive than we care to admit.
To truly understand the enabling environment, we have to move past just the crimes and examine the ecosystem he built.
Right.
A world driven by excess, by secrecy, and by this intoxicating, corrosive belief that wealth just dissolves consequences. This wasn't the life of a quiet financier.
No, it was a curated, deliberate fantasy realm built to facilitate and to hide exploitation.
And the material foundation of his untouchable status was essential to that. The sheer, overwhelming extravagance. It signaled to everyone around him that he operated under a different set of rules.
A different reality. We're talking about the $77 million Manhattan mansion, the private island.
Little St. James, nicknamed Pedophile Island by the locals.
The vast Zorro Ranch in New Mexico, the private jets.
But these weren't just luxurious residences, were they? They were controlled environments, engineered spaces.
Exactly. Designed explicitly for privacy, secrecy, and surveillance. They functioned as social venues where he set the tone and he set the rules.
Visitors described them as opulent, but unsettling.
Unsettling is the perfect word, filled with strange decor like customized marble floors and peculiar artwork, and staffed by young women and assistants, many of whom were, in fact, victims coerced into domestic and sexual labor.
Power requires absolute control, and his properties provided that isolation. It made leaks nearly impossible.
And the curated social universe he maintained served this crucial dual purpose in his architecture of impunity.
Okay, so what was that dual purpose?
Well, the gatherings ranged from these intimate elite dinners to academic salons. On one hand, they were framed as intellectual networking events.
Right, attracting the highest status crowds, billionaires, academics looking for funding, former presidents, royals, tech founders. This proximity gave him legitimacy.
And on the other hand, the primary function of these events was maintaining cover. They created an environment where exploitation could happen completely unnoticed or, more likely, unchallenged.
The settings were highly polished, quiet, and controlled. They slowly eroded boundaries under this guise of sophistication.
And the most disturbing, yet universally observed, hallmark of these scenes was the manufactured atmosphere of youth, the constant, disturbing omnipresence of very young women.
Introduced casually as assistants, masseuses, students, or even scientific consultants.
That casual introduction was the psychological lubricant. These were often trafficked minors forced to serve, to attend parties, and present this illusion of adult consent. It was all designed to obscure the exploitation that was happening in plain sight.
And these gatherings normalized the presence of young women in vulnerable positions under this heavy curtain of sophistication and glamour.
Which made it socially uncomfortable for any powerful guest to ask a serious question.
So let's talk about the guests, because the list of those in his orbit, politicians, financiers, scientists, it's staggering. His whole world was built on proximity to power.
He cultivated it obsessively. He was constantly searching for new validation.
It seems like he was a master of a specific social strategy formula.
He was, and it was simple. Money plus access plus youth equals influence.
Explain that.
He used the lavish environments, the private travel, the intellectual conversations, and the exclusive introductions to give powerful people a sense of being chosen, of being elite. And in that high-status environment, the exploitation was strategically hidden or simply ignored.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. The psychology of silence. Why didn't more powerful, ostensibly ethical people intervene? Especially those who sensed something was severely off about the environment.
Because when the environment is that luxurious, that insulated and controlled by a host who seems to be an oracle of wealth, people override their own instincts.
They practice social self-censorship?
Exactly. They trust the collective status of the room. Well, if X, Y, and Z are here, it must be okay, instead of their own internal alarm bells.
It's a powerful groupthink effect.
It is. And the underlying painful truth is that the more powerful the host, the more passive the guest becomes. Power protects power. And nobody wanted to risk their own access, their status, or their reputation by challenging the individual at the center of that orbit.
So the parties ultimately reflected a deeper systemic truth about elite culture.
That boundaries blur, accountability is weak, and social currency outweighs ethics every single time. Witnesses stay silent, victims are dismissed, and secrecy just becomes the accepted norm of that elite class.
It created a kind of psychological drug, didn't it? The wealth, the status, the favors.
It produced the intoxicating, corrosive belief that nothing, absolutely nothing, has consequences. He expertly exploited a culture where society romanticizes eccentric billionaires, excuses wealthy criminals.
And tolerates boundary-blurring behavior simply because of the sheer amount of money and influence involved.
And that institutional and cultural blindness allowed his operation to flourish unchecked for decades. It proved that the greatest form of power is the power to make your problems disappear.
The wall of institutional silence and legal protection, it was finally broken in 2018. But not by the legal system initiating action?
No, it was broken by rigorous ethical journalism. The Miami Herald investigation forced federal prosecutors to revisit and eventually reopen the case.
Which led to his arrest in July 2019.
But even the abrupt resolution of the case, his death a month later, contributed profoundly to this crisis of faith in our institutions.
Right. The official ruling remains suicide, but that outcome was met with widespread public disbelief and outrage.
And that deep, immediate mistrust reveals a fundamental cultural truth. When incredibly powerful people are connected to a crime, the public simply does not trust institutions, whether it's law enforcement or medical examiners, to investigate fairly or thoroughly.
That mistrust is compounded by the fact that the case was thwarted for so long. Which brings us back to the systemic mechanisms of protection that allowed him to evade accountability for more than a decade.
The primary mechanism was financial influence used as a buffer. He strategically deployed philanthropic donations and financial support to prestigious universities, scientific research labs, charitable foundations,
Creating a shield.
a very real buffer against scrutiny. Because institutions feared biting the hand that fed them. They feared risking millions in funding or jeopardizing the intellectual prestige associated with his name and his connections.
And the second mechanism was the network itself, which acted as a human shield.
He cultivated scientists seeking funding, politicians seeking donations, academics seeking prestige, and intellectual conversation.
These relationships created immense institutional conflicts of interest.
They did. Officials, whether they were prosecutors, regulators, even university deans, they were inherently reluctant to challenge an individual who was deemed socially indispensable by their peers.
And we can't overlook the sheer legal power structures that were leveraged, both in the early stages and throughout.
His defense team included not only high-profile constitutional lawyers, but former U.S. attorneys, influential political power brokers. These networks enabled delay, obstruction, and strategic negotiation.
And it was all fueled by a structural cowardice within the justice system that was utterly unwilling to aggressively confront a wealthy, networked perpetrator.
It was the path of least resistance for them.
Moving beyond the documented crimes, we have to confront the legacy of documented unresolved issues. These are the factual gaps between power and justice that remain years later.
And they continue to fuel public anger and suspicion.
Exactly. The fundamental questions persist. How did he acquire his initial wealth? Who truly managed and supported his financial operations?
Why were investigations consistently minimized? What happened to the full list of associates who utilized his services or facilitated his crimes?
And crucially, why are so many court documents, depositions, flight manifests, the names of John Does and intermediaries still sealed from public view?
Part of that opacity stems from the existence of this unseen network that remains uncharged. Much of the case is still deliberately obscured behind those sealed court documents.
The legal system cites privacy concerns, but
the tangible result is a system that protects silence and shields the identities of the powerful.
And we have to consider the sheer number of uncharged associates. While Epstein and Maxwell faced judgment, numerous others named in victim testimony pilots, staff, administrators, recruiters, facilitators across borders, they've faced no charges.
And they continue to be active in their professional fields. The network was built to protect itself, and in many critical ways, it continues to succeed.
Why? What are the factors for that sustained silence?
They're consistent. Political connections, institutional reluctance, and financial influence acting as a permanent legal shield.
So the absence of transparency really just confirms the public's worst fear.
That systems of power are often built primarily to shield themselves, not to expose the full, ugly truth.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, I think the most profound truth that emerged from this entire tragedy is the immense courage of the survivors.
Absolutely. Their relentless determination forced the world to confront a reality that powerful institutions tried to bury permanently.
For years, they were questioned, discredited, intimidated, and marginalized simply because their socioeconomic backgrounds made their voices easier to ignore.
They suffered trauma, shame, and this inability to trust authorities. They believed no one would ever believe them against such a powerful figure.
But their bravery, speaking publicly, connecting with journalists, supporting one another, that was the singular turning point.
Survivor testimony illuminated the precise patterns of grooming, the specific roles of the facilitators, the network nature of the system, and the manipulation of vulnerability. Their voices exposed the truth the justice system initially refused to acknowledge.
Proving that collective, courageous action is sometimes the only way to challenge these impenetrable elite systems.
It is.
Epstein is gone, but the structural issues he exposed, they remain. The legacy is one of institutional failure and a severe erosion of public trust.
Across politics, justice, academia, and high finance.
The case fuels these essential calls for radical judicial transparency and, crucially, for accountability for the enablers.
Yes. Epstein did not act alone. Accountability has to extend to the recruiters, the financial institutions, the landlords, the lawyers, all the associates who were aware of something, even if they claim not to have known the full picture.
The culture of looking the other way.
That is the real crime here.
So what does this all mean for us?
The deeper lesson is that preventing another Epstein requires fundamental structural change. We have to address institutional complacency, eliminate elite impunity, and dismantle the cultural worship of wealth, the very systems that allowed him to thrive, to operate, and to be protected for so long.
The Epstein case is not just about one monstrous man. It is about the world that built him and sustained him, a world where wealth obscures truth and where connections prove stronger than justice. But this world isn't immutable. It's shaped by our collective choices, our willingness to question authority, and our refusal to tolerate the bending of justice for the privileged few. The challenge is building a system that simply does not allow this kind of exploitation and subsequent institutional protection to ever happen again.
We owe that much and more to the survivors whose voices forced this reckoning.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please like, subscribe, and share this video. Also, let us know in the comments what really stood out to you in this conversation and if there's any related topic or new topic that you would like covered in a future video.